After Lexington and Concord, there was no turning back. The first shots had been fired, and now it wasn't talk anymore, it was war. But this wasn't some organized army. This was just regular men grabbing anything they had and getting ready to fight. As the fighting spread, the colonies figured out something very fast. If they were going to win this war, they needed a real army.
After Lexington and Concord, everything changed. What had started as tension was now turning into war. Across the colonies, ordinary men stepped forward. Farmers, laborers, neighbors, leaving behind their homes and their families. Not as soldiers, but as citizens, ready to fight. Towns filled with urgency, fear, and resolve. And as militias gathered, one thing became clear. There was no turning back now. What started as rebellion was now a war. They had courage, but they didn't have an army. What stood before him was not a fighting force, but farmers, laborers, men with no training, no discipline, no unity. And he knew it. This wasn't going to be easy, but he also knew if they were to survive, they would have to become something more. And slowly, through discipline, through leadership, those men began to change. They would be tested, not with words, but with fire. The enemy came, disciplined and relentless, and still they held their ground, waiting, holding, until the moment came. And then it began. Smoke, chaos, and the sound of war. No more training, no more preparation, only survival. And when it was over, they had proven something. They could stand, they could fight, but not without cost. They didn't break, they held. And when the smoke cleared, they were still there. They learned not just how to fight, but how to think, how to move as one. They were no longer just men. They were becoming something more. And with that came belief. Not in the moment, but in what they could become. And so they moved forward, because this fight was far from over.
At first, it wasn't about independence. It was about standing up and pushing back. But something started to change. In taverns like this and all across the colonies, men began to ask, what are we really fighting for? Not just to resist, but to become something new, separate, independent, free.
They didn't just resist, they declared. No more hesitation, no more debate. A line had been crossed, ink met paper, and with it, everything changed. This was no longer rebellion, this was independence. And if they failed, it would be treason, punishable by death. And then they told the world. There was no hiding it now, no turning back. Only one path forward, win or lose everything. But now they had to survive it, because what stood across from them wasn't just an army. It was the most powerful military force on Earth. Disciplined, supplied, endless, lines of red stretching farther than the eye could see. And just when it seemed like too much, more ships arrived. More soldiers, more cannons, more of everything they didn't have. They were outnumbered, outtrained, outgunned, and they knew it. They could see it, standing right in front of them. These weren't seasoned soldiers, not yet. Men with barely enough to fight, let alone win. And still, they held the line. They weren't ready. They weren't enough, but they didn't run. They stood strong. They struck when no one expected it. In the cold, before dawn, they moved. Not as an army built for war, but as men who had nothing left to lose. And for the first time, the British were caught off guard. They hit fast, they hit hard, and they didn't stop. Momentum began to build, not everywhere, not all at once, but enough. Enough to prove something had changed. Because when the fighting was done, the unthinkable happened. The British surrendered. And just like that, everything was different. Word spread from camp to town to tavern. Whispers turned into belief. Belief turned into hope. And for the first time, it wasn't just survival. Victory was now a reality. Winter came, and it didn't care who had just won. The cold cut through everything, clothes, tents, even hope. Men went hungry. Some didn't have shoes. Every step left blood in the snow. They weren't fighting anymore. They were trying to survive. And by all accounts, this army shouldn't have made it. George Washington wasn't the greatest military mind in the world. He had made mistakes, lost battles, been forced to retreat. But he was there, in the cold, in the hunger, with his men. And when everything said they should leave, they stayed. He stayed. Then, something changed. A soldier arrived, Baron von Steuben. He didn't bring food, he didn't bring warmth. He brought discipline. Day after day, in the freezing cold, he drilled them, taught them, broke them down, and built them back up. And slowly, quietly, something new began to form. If they could survive this winter, they wouldn't just be alive. They would be ready. The winter broke, and with it, something else had changed. The cold was gone. Now, it was heat. Blazing sun, thick air, and a battlefield waiting. The British came, confident as ever. They had seen this army before. They knew how this ended, or at least they thought they did. Lines formed, clean, steady, disciplined. Muskets rose as one, and smoke began to fill the air. This wasn't the army they remembered. And then came the moment, the kind of moment where everything falls apart, where men panic, where lines break, where armies run. Except, this time, it didn't. They held. Through the heat, through the smoke, through the chaos, they held. Not perfectly, not easily, but they stood. The same men who had frozen, who had starved, who had nearly been lost, now stood and fought as soldiers. They didn't win the battle, but they proved something bigger. They weren't going anywhere.
They held their ground. And because word spread, not just through the colonies, but also across the oceans, France had been watching, waiting, and now they believed. They didn't just send supplies anymore. They sent an army. They sent a navy. They sent power. This was now a war the British couldn't control. So the British adapted. They moved south, played dirtier, burned entire towns. Because if they couldn't break the army, they would break the people. But what they didn't realize was that every move they made was setting a trap. And soon, they would walk right into it.
Surrounded on land, cut off at sea, there was nowhere left to run. The British were trapped. The walls didn't just close in, they stayed there. Day after day the cannons spoke. Smoke filled the sky, fire crept through their lines, and slowly, the fight left them. And then, they knew. This wasn't a battle they could win. This wasn't even a battle they could escape. So, by the order of General Charles Cornwallis, they raised the white flag. But when the time came to surrender, Cornwallis didn't show. Instead, he sent another man, General Charles O'Hara, to do it for him. And Washington noticed. He didn't step forward. He didn't take the surrender himself. He handed it off to a man who had once been forced to surrender to the British, General Benjamin Lincoln. This time, they were the ones laying down their arms.
With the surrender at Yorktown, the war was officially over. The guns stopped, the smoke began to drift, and for the first time in years, the fighting faded away. A new normal was about to return to what was becoming a new country. An empire had come across an ocean and tried to hold a land that would not be held. And right here, at Yorktown, it finally slipped through their fingers. General Charles Cornwallis surrendered his army, not in person, but instead hiding his shame behind closed doors. And General George Washington did not need the moment, did not need the spotlight. He honored another with that historic moment, content to simply witness it, because the war had already been decided. What began with farmers, miners, merchants, and men willing to stand ended here. With a new nation, no longer imagined, but a reality, America had arrived.